December 19th, 2021, 9:15 at night, the Sunday before Christmas. My phone buzzed on the stretcher with a glittering line of text from my sister road trip with the real crew. 4 days later, I would be asked to send $3,100 for a cabin I was never invited to, and a car I relied on would be declared a loss. I am Marcus Hale, 32, the responsible one my family mistook for a bottomless well. If you have ever been blindsided by your own family's hunger for comfort on your dime, tell me your city in the comments. Subscribe now to catch the moment the receipts turned into consequences, because every timestamp matters, and a doorbell camera remembers what people prefer to forget. Family is a group project where one person does all the work until December 19th proved otherwise. The night had been ordinary in the way danger likes highway hum wipers ticking my mind idling on the week ahead. I was driving west on Interstate 90, crossing the dark spine of Snoqualmie Pass, returning to Seattle after a client walkthrough in Spokane. The temperature had been sliding all evening, and the road looked dry in that misleading winter way that makes you trust it. I saw the red blink of hazard lights far ahead, then a gleam of metal fishtailing across lanes, a semi-truck beginning the slow, terrible fold of a jackknife. It is strange what you hear when panic unspools the hollow drum of an empty coffee cup in the passenger door, the skitter of gravel as my tires left their logic, and then the long metallic moan as my car turned and gravity took the wheel. I remember a white sky spinning through the windshield, and then the blunt quiet of stopping. Blue light filled that quiet. A paramedic with patient eyes said my name twice and asked for an emergency contact. I gave him my parents' numbers because habit can be louder than truth. The ambulance felt both too bright and not bright enough. As they checked my breathing, my phone buzzed again on the gurney, a reflexive ghost of normal life. The notification bloomed from my sister Erin's account, a story posted not an hour after the crash road trip with the real crew geotagged at a gas station in North Bend. The words were a small thing, a joke with a shine on it, but my ribs hurt in a way that made the joke sound like a verdict. The nurse wrote no family present on the chart, and that was the first official sentence of the new world. They took me to Harborview. The admitting clerk asked if someone would be coming for me. I said yes because that was the kind of answer I had learned to give. It keeps the room warm. It keeps the nurse from looking at you like you are a question she cannot fix. Hours have a way of getting heavy when you are waiting for someone who has already chosen not to come. I counted the ceiling tiles because numbers calm me, and then I remembered I was not counting ceiling tiles. I was counting excuses. Maybe the roads were bad. Maybe they had not seen the missed calls from the paramedics. Maybe the maybes lined up like snowdrifts against the door I would not open. When I was discharged, I took an Uber to my apartment on Capitol Hill, the driver filling the space with small talk I did not have to answer. At home, the air smelled like laundry and lemon cleaner because I had mopped the morning I left for Spokane. I set the hospital bracelet on the counter and stared at it as though it might declare a different story if I gave it time. Then I did what I always do when life feels crooked. I made a list. The first line read, "Stop bleeding." I meant money. I also meant hope. But what they did not know was that years before this night, I had signed a single document that would decide what happened next. 5 winters earlier, to help my father secure a loan, he transferred the company to my name, a limited liability company with a tidy file in a fireproof safe. We never transferred it back. I had been the operator in practice. Suddenly, in law, I had been the owner. I tucked that knowledge away because peace was a habit I wore like a uniform. I told myself it was only temporary, that we would correct the paper later, that family was not paperwork. I was wrong. Paper remembers, and so do cameras. At 2 a.m, my phone vibrated again. This time it was not a story. It was a group message festooned with thumbs and balloons, celebrating a winter weekend in Leavenworth that everyone deserved. Erin wrote that everyone was chipping in. Trevor echoed her. Chloe added hearts. The thread named a number that was not small to me, not after a wreck and a deductible and a week's worth of silence. $3,100. They did not ask if I was safe. They did not ask if I could breathe without pain. They did not ask if I could come. They asked for what they had always asked for, the difference between their plans and their budgets. Here's the part I will explain fully later because it matters, and because the reveal deserves its own chair at the table. The geotag on Aaron's story placed them in North Bend minutes after my ambulance screamed past the same exit, and the doorbell at my building would soon record my mother practicing a story she hoped I would believe. For now, all you need to know is that the proof existed long before anyone considered the cost of lying. I did not respond to the group message. I did not post a subtweet. I folded the hospital discharge papers into an envelope, slid it beside the manila folder marked with the company's name, and set both on my kitchen table. I went to bed with ice on my ribs, a list on my phone, and a calm I had not felt in years. When morning came, Seattle was washed in that pale winter light that makes even the brutal look gentle. I brewed coffee and drank it without tasting it, the way you drink water after a bad dream. In the quiet, a thought settled and would not leave if I kept behaving like the person they expected I would keep living the story they wrote. The next moves would not be loud. They would be clean. They would be kind in the way a locked door is kind. And before anyone even knew something had changed, I would change everything. I will tell you how in the next part, but remember this timestamp, December 19th, 2021, 9:15 at night. That is when the old script ended. By the time the sun cleared the rooftops, the apartment had the stillness of a church after a service, and I could finally hear what the previous night had said. It did not shout. It whispered, "You are the responsible one because you keep volunteering." I made coffee and opened the spreadsheet that organizes my life the way a spine organizes a body. Tabs for crews, tabs for suppliers, tabs for banking, another for family. That last tab had become its own small city of transactions over the years: rentals, co-pays, groceries, late fees, little rescues that never felt little in the moment. When I traced the totals month by month, the number settled like a weight $2,780. That figure is not a mountain if you have mountains behind you, but I was one person with a salary and a habit of fixing things before anyone had to feel the consequences. I had covered medicine for my mother, half of my father's mortgage, a loan payment that let Aaron keep a program. She later paused anyway, the lease on Chloe's car and the rolling interest on Trevor's credit cards. I carried the family cell phone plan because negotiating with the carrier used to give my father a headache, and the streaming subscriptions because it was easier to click yes than to listen to an argument about passwords. Love had become a utility bill with my name on it. People like to think being the responsible one means you love more cleanly than everyone else. The truth is messier. I learned early that being prepared earns you trust and being calm makes you invisible. As kids, we had a lemonade stand where I kept the jar, counted the quarters, and wrote down who needed change. My father called me the bookkeeper with pride in his voice and impatience in his hands. He would clap my shoulder and say, "Family sticks together." It sounded like a promise then. It turned into a command later. The first time my father fell behind on a contractor invoice, and we were a week from losing a supplier discount, I stayed up past midnight, learning the accounting software, and scheduled payments in a way that kept the hammer from falling. The next morning he said thank you, and then asked if I could also watch the phones and check the vendor statements, and maybe review the timesheets because you are so good with details. Bit by bit, I built a machine that ran smoother than his temper, and soon anyone who wanted something done learned to come to me. The quiet part of the story is this: I chose it. I chose it because competence can feel like control in a house where words are thrown like tools. I chose it because being useful is a hard habit to drop when the alternative is being in the way. But usefulness is a river that keeps changing its banks. My siblings were not cruel. They were comfortable. Erin liked to say I was structured, which meant she could text me a need and trust the need would become a check. Chloe called me steady, which was sweet in the way a nickname is sweet when it contains a request. Trevor just said my guy and sent screenshots of balances with dates highlighted in yellow. I would sigh and then I would solve it. Even my mother, who loves me, warmly learned to wrap an ask in worry so I could feel heroic while I opened my wallet. The worst part is how natural it all felt, how right, like a coat that fits so well you forget you are wearing it. When my father wanted a personal loan and the bank balked, he came to me with a plan. He would transfer the company to my name as a temporary measure to satisfy the lender's criteria. It sounded like a formality, and I wanted to be helpful, and he promised we would switch it back after the approval, so I agreed. We sat at a kitchen table with a notary who smelled faintly of peppermint, and I signed where the tabs told me to sign. The company became in law a limited liability company with me as the owner of record. I filed the papers carefully because that is what I do, and then went back to the 1,000 daily tasks of running a crew that liked direct answers and a calendar that liked to be fed. The switchback never came. Every few months I would mention it, and my father would wave it away with a joke about how I was the responsible one, and it was better this way for now. For now stretched into years, and I let it, because quiet is addictive when you make your living smoothing edges. The apartment window looked west toward the water, and in the glass I could see a tired man who had learned to appear fresh. I remembered the afternoon I taught myself to draft purchase orders because a vendor in Kent had hinted that phone calls were not enough. I remembered balancing receivables so a crew could get paid before a holiday, and the relief on those men's faces as they bought gifts for kids with cash that cleared. I remembered, too, the times I bought groceries for my parents' pantry because the fridge had the hollow echo of a stage prop. None of those memories felt tragic. They felt useful. But usefulness without boundaries is how you become a resource and stop being a person, and once people decide you are a resource, they will resent you whenever you run dry. I kept that thought in the center of the page as I drafted a new list. The title was Dull on Purpose Baseline Protections. Not revenge, not yet. Just the kind of maintenance any professional would consider common sense. I would audit every recurring payment that left my accounts for someone else's comfort. I would separate the pharmacy account so my mother's medicine was never held hostage by family drama, and I would remove my card from any automatic charge that was not tied to business. I would confirm in writing with every supplier that all authorizations required my signature. I would prepare a single calm letter that said the engine is changing how it runs. And then, in time, I would act on the fact that the company on paper, and in fact, was mine. But not today. Not with the ache still fresh and the proof still rolling in. For now, I wrote, I breathed, I remembered that limits are a form of love too. There is a moment in every story where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Mine arrived as a simple notification, a cheerful request dressed in confetti for a winter weekend I was not invited to fund, but expected to finance. The number again was $3,100. The cheerfulness was the part that caught in my throat. You do not laugh when the person who keeps your roof from leaking is lying under a hospital fluorescent light, unless you have trained yourself never to see him as a person at all. I closed my eyes, then I opened them, and then I opened my safe. The manila folder waited where it always waits, patient as law. Paper remembers, and I was done pretending I did not. I will tell you about that document next, and about what it allowed me to do without raising my voice. But first understand the arithmetic of my life. Every time I erased a problem quietly, I taught them to write over me. That lesson ended the night the snow chose sides. The rest is just accounting. The manila folder was where it always lived, in the bottom drawer of the small metal cabinet that clicks softly when it closes, a sound that used to calm me. I set it on the kitchen table and felt the ordinary heft of paper that has decided stranger fates than knives or guns ever could. The tab read our company name in my neat block letters. Inside the first document was the Articles of Organization stamped by the Washington Secretary of State, dated in the winter of 2016. The second was a simple operating agreement that named the business as Member Managed and listed one member, my name. Not as a courtesy, not as a proxy, but as the sole owner of record. The third sheet named a registered agent at an address that would not embarrass a bank, and the fourth carried an employer identification number 9 digits that tie a business to the government like a thread to a needle. None of this was a surprise. It was worse. It was familiar. I had maintained it for years the way I maintain everything on time quietly, so no one else had to think about it. Memory can be treacherous, or it can be precise. Mine turned precise as I read. I remembered the day we signed peppermint on the breath of the notary at my parents' kitchen table, my father talking faster than usual because asking for help made him feel caged. He called it a temporary arrangement to satisfy a lender, a few weeks at most, a favor that would return to normal as soon as the loan cleared. The loan cleared. The temporary never ended. Each spring after that, around April, a polite email reminder arrived from the state, and I paid the annual fee from my own account because it was easier to pay than to debate. The bank changed its contact card to me without drama because I showed up with the file and a calm face. Vendors updated their authorizations because I sent them clean forms and answered questions promptly. In practice, I was the operator. In law, I was the owner. We just never said it out loud at the holiday table. I slid the papers back into their plastic sleeves and let my hands rest on the folder as if it were a steering wheel. There is a kind of peace that looks like conflict avoidance but is really self-erasure. I had practiced that art until it felt like virtue. Yet the numbers that run a business do not care about family myth. They care about signatures, about whose name appears on a federal identification, about who signs the checks and files the reports. My signature was everywhere a signature mattered. My father's voice was everywhere a voice got attention. Those two facts had coexisted like parallel tracks, never touching until black ice and a jackknifed truck forced them to meet. The obvious play would have been to call to demand apologies to make a scene so large the neighbors might peek through blinds. But quiet revenge, if you want to call it that, is not an explosion. It is a series of silent corrections that bring the world back into alignment with the truth. Before I touched a lever, I needed my receipts in order and not the kind you get from a cash register. I needed the kind stamped by time. So I opened my phone and scrolled the messages that had flown while my ribs ached under hospital fluorescence. A cousin named Jason had texted me a screen recording the morning after the crash, a crisp little video that captured my sister's story before she deleted it. In the corner sat a timestamp 9:42 and a geotag that placed them at a gas station in North Bend. Jason did not add commentary beyond one sentence, "Thought you should have this." The restraint was a gift. It made the file feel like evidence rather than gossip. I marked that message as saved. If the day ever came where someone tried to rewrite the narrative, the record would be dull and unforgiving. Cameras turn people's favorite lies into chores. I stepped to the other drawer, the one with the doorbell manuals, and confirmed that our building's device keeps clips in the cloud. I did not watch any footage yet. I wanted my next steps to be guided by principle, not adrenaline. Paper. First policy, second, people last. It sounds cold written that way. It was the only order that had a chance of being fair. On the business side, the structure was already mine to steward. Bank signatories listed me as primary. The domain registration listed me as administrator. The accounting software had my master credentials because someone has to be able to fix what breaks at 2 a.m. Years ago, I had built purchase order templates so that suppliers could match what we approved to what we received. And the vendors in Kent and Tacoma praised the orderliness with the kind of relief only tradespeople understand. None of these choices were dramatic. All of them were deliberate. They were the bones of a small company that kept families fed and roofs straight. If my father preferred to be the face, that was fine. The face would no longer outvote the hands. It is easy sitting alone at a kitchen table to imagine yourself a judge handing down a sentence. I am not a judge. I am a bookkeeper who can read the ledger. The ledger said I had been underwriting the difference between other people's expectations and reality for years in business and in blood. The ledger also said the entity that paid the bills and shouldered the liability was owned by me. Ownership is not a crown. It is a duty. The duty that night was simple: stop pretending the documents do not exist. The phone vibrated with fresh chatter from the family group thread, thrusting a new plan into the day like a party hat after a funeral. A celebratory winter weekend in Leavenworth needed funding. I had heard versions of this asked so many times that the words barely registered, only the number did landing like a familiar weight. $3,100, the kind of sum that most people treat as discretionary until a deductible comes due or a transmission fails. My transmission had failed in a ditch of ice. They wanted a cabin with twinkling lights and cocoa. For the first time, the ask did not feel like a claim on my love. It felt like a lever I could leave untouched. That is the lead into the next move, the part where policy becomes action without a raised voice. I would not announce my ownership like a victory. I would embody it as a standard. I would write to the vendors in clear language about authorization. I would separate personal subsidies from business operations and end them. I would close the river and keep the well for rain. And then one afternoon, very soon, I would answer their celebratory request with a single ordinary sentence that rearranged our lives. But that is a scene of its own, and it deserves light. For now, understand this paper remembers, and I had finally decided to remember with it. 4 days later, the request arrived in the tone only family can perfect cheerful entitlement wrapped in confetti. A Venmo ping lit my phone a little after 9 in the morning with a note from Trevor that read, "Everyone's chipping in for the cabin this weekend." The amount was $3,100. The timing mattered, so let me correct the record before anyone else tries to. In the foggy hours after the crash, I had seen a group thread about the trip and a line about costs, but there had been no direct request. That came now on the 4th day when they knew I was upright enough to be useful and apparently upright enough to be billed. Consistency matters to me. This is me being precise. The request pulled a curtain on a stage I knew by heart. We had gone to Leavenworth every winter since we were kids, a Bavarian postcard tucked in the Cascades where fake snow could not improve on the real kind. I remembered my father stomping his boots on porch boards and calling it tradition, which meant Marcus will plan the logistics. As teenagers, Aaron and Chloe bought matching scarves for photos, while I called the host about the thermostat and confirmed checkout so the fees did not sneak up on us. As adults, nothing changed except the price tags. Tradition is just habit with better lighting. The trip was planned through a rental platform, and the deposit had gone through on someone else's card months before. Now came the moment the gap between plan and budget yawned open, and I historically filled it. If I am being honest, my body half reached for the pay button out of muscle memory, the way you reach for a light switch in a house you no longer live in. But what they did not know was that I had stopped living there inside the role where my usefulness erased me. That small decision was not drama, it was alignment. I scrolled back through the messages that bracketed the week my father's call back. "It is urgent. We cannot fix this without you." Aaron's hearts on the travel thread. Chloe's joke about who was bringing the good cocoa. Trevor's Venmo request with its exclamation point working twice as hard as the fax. And then Jason's screen recording the one he sent the morning after the crash, 9:42 geotag North Bend, my sister holding the phone at an angle people use when they want to look like they do not care how good they look. He had typed only 4 words. "Thought you should have this." I did. I saved it twice, then uploaded a copy to cloud storage I pay for myself because I am done trusting other people with evidence that matters to my life. The number on the request kept sitting there like a dare. $3,100. It is not a fortune. It is also not nothing. It is a month of groceries for a family that reads labels and cooks at home. It is a deductible that does not ask for an explanation. It is the airfare to see a friend you keep promising you will visit. It is most of all a reminder that I had trained my family to treat my labor and my money as a wind that blew exactly when they wanted it to. Winds shift. If this sounds cold, remember the hospital wristband on my counter that still read, "No family present." That sentence had cost me more than money. It had cost me the last illusion that what we were doing together could be called love without an asterisk. I set the phone on the table beside the manila folder that spelled ownership in ink instead of sentiment. I inhaled, exhaled, and waited for the first wave of anger to break and recede. I am not good at rage. It has never helped me balance a ledger, or calm a foreman, or negotiate with a supplier who has been burned before. What I am good at is policy. So I opened a blank email and wrote a draft to myself with a subject line as boring as a file cabinet Leavenworth funding. In the body, I wrote the only sentence that mattered. I am no longer paying for leisure that excludes me, and I am no longer funding anyone's plans without signed authorization tied to company business. I read it aloud. It sounded like a lock clicking. Then I rehearsed the next small surgical moves that would follow, not announcements, not threats, not drama. First, the quiet separation of my personal accounts from anything that served as someone else's safety net. Second, the clarification to every vendor that purchase orders require my signature because the company in law matches the company in practice. Third, the letter that would route my mother's medicine payments directly to the pharmacy so care could not be held hostage by anyone's mood. There would be more, but those three would be enough to start the ground shifting under old habits. My phone buzzed again. Aaron had added a row of hearts and said, "We deserve this weekend more than ever." I could have typed a dozen true things. I typed nothing. Silence is not empty. It is a ledger entry that says no longer liable. A minute later, my mother's name slid across the lock screen. I let it go to voicemail because I needed my heartbeat to stay slow. When the transcription appeared, it was the start of a script, honey, we did not know. The roads. You know how your dad gets. We can talk about the cabin later, but right now, can you just... I stopped reading. Scripts only work if both actors stick to them. I had left the play. What came next would look like kindness to outsiders and cruelty to anyone accustomed to being rescued. I would not address the Venmo request today. I would mark it pending in my mind and in the app. I would keep my hands off the button and let the weekend carry itself forward with whatever resources they had. I would allow cause and effect to reacquaint themselves after years of being forcibly separated by my wallet. And before the week ended, I would make one phone call that would end the cabin before it began, not by yelling, but by honoring agreements the way adults do. That part, unlike the Venmo ping, would leave a paper trail. People can argue with feelings. They cannot argue with a copy of a policy emailed to the right address at the right time. Remember this the night the snow chose sides. I learned the difference between peace and silence. Peace tells the truth and makes room to breathe. Silence lets other people write your lines. I had been silent long enough. The next part is about the doorbell that remembers everything and the casserole cooling on the stoop while I decide who I am going to be. At 3:05 in the afternoon, the doorbell chimed with that polite little trill that pretends it is not a camera. On my phone, the live view bloomed into the cold color of Seattle winter. My mother stood on the stoop with a casserole balanced in a foil pan and a tote bag full of Tupperware, her breath puffing in tidy clouds. She glanced left, then right, then up at the lens as if to fix her hair. But what she fixed was the story. We did not know she murmured, practicing it to the rhythm of her own exhale. We did not know honey. The roads were bad. Your father? She stopped, started again testing which words sounded less like excuses and more like concern. The doorbell is unforgiving. It records breath as much as sentences, and what it captured just then was rehearsal. I did not buzz her in. I wanted to. Reflex is a muscle you have to retrain, and mine had been lifting the weight of everyone else's comfort for years. Instead, I placed the phone on the counter and watched from the kitchen as my mother moved from worry to impatience, and back again the way people do when they know the door can open and are angry that it does not. My ribs throbbed, but the ache felt clarifying rather than cruel. The nurse's bracelet on the countertop still read "No family present," and there she was present, but not honest staging care like a photograph. The camera does not judge, it just remembers. She rang again. The chime sounded soft and ordinary, as if this were a neighbor asking for sugar. I stepped into the hallway and looked through the peephole without touching the lock. It is such a small thing, that space between you and a decision. On the other side of the wood stood a woman who taught me to be neat, and on time who can turn a kitchen into a church and a sentence into a plea. She is also the first person I ever saw change a story to keep a peace she did not earn. Both truths sat there in a coat the color of oatmeal, carrying a casserole that was getting colder by the minute. I chose the truth and walked back to the kitchen. When the doorbell stopped ringing, my phone buzzed with a voicemail. "Honey, I brought food. Please pick up," she said. "Your father is upset. We did not know about the hospital, the paramedics were probably confused, and your sister should not have posted that thing, but you know how she is." I let the transcript sit unread. Scripts rely on a shared stage. I had left the play. In the live view, my mother placed the casserole on the step like an offering and retreated to the curb where she pretended to check her messages, then finally slid into the passenger seat of my father's truck. He did not get out. He stared straight ahead while she spoke and gestured, and then they drove away without looking back. The camera saved the clip to the cloud. Paper remembers. Cameras do too. An hour later, a different knock, the gentle, unhurried rap of our mail carrier. I opened the door, and a small stack of envelopes slid into my hands, topped by a card with my grandmother's careful handwriting. Inside was a note on floral stationery. "Kindness is not a contract, darling. Use this for the opposite of whatever they expect." Folded into the card was a check written in her neat loops for $3,100. The number sat there with the weight of a verdict and the softness of a blessing. I stood at the counter and let the quiet wrap around me, then slipped the check back into the card as if tucking a child into bed. I did not cash it. I walked to the fireproof safe, opened it, and laid the card beside the folder that proves the company is mine. Side by side, they looked like two kinds of proof, legal and human. The apartment held the kind of silence you only get when you have chosen it. Outside, the afternoon thinned into the gray that tastes like rain. I made tea and thought about every time I had mistaken noise for love. My mother's knock had been loud. My grandmother's note was barely a whisper. Only one of them felt like care. I took out a pad and wrote in small block letters a summary of what the doorbell and the mailbox had delivered: rehearsal, not remorse, a gift, not a demand. Those 2 lines would anchor the next moves. They would keep my hands steady when guilt tried to sell me a detour back to the old story. I replayed the clip of my mother one more time, not to punish myself, but to confirm details I already knew. She had looked up at the lens after the line about not knowing, as if asking the house to co-sign the lie. She had used my father as a reason rather than a person. She had brought food instead of an apology. People tell you who they are when they think no one is taking notes. I saved the file again, labeled it Stoop Rehearsal, Thursday, 3:05. Then I opened a blank document titled Boundary Letters and began to draft. Not accusations, not grievances. Boundary is a calm word. It sounds like a fence that has always been there, not a wall built out of anger in the dark. The first letter was for my parents, a clear statement that I would handle my mother's medicine payments directly with the pharmacy, so that health never sat in the same room as argument again, and that I would no longer contribute to my father's mortgage car or leisure. The second was for my siblings, a policy, not a plea, that I would not fund trips or tides of spending that did not involve me and did not serve the company. The third was internal for me alone: do not open the door to rehearsed concern. Open it to repair. It is a short sentence, but short sentences can hold a lot of future. Before the light faded, I stepped out to collect the casserole from the stoop. It had cooled into a shape that held its own outline, like a lesson that finally remembers itself. I set it on the counter, uncovered it, and divided it into containers to freeze for later. Waste nothing. My grandmother says not even hard days. When I slid the last container into the freezer, my phone blinked with a new message from Aaron, covered in Sparkle's cabin countdown. I looked at the clock. 2 days. That would be enough time to do this the quiet way. Tomorrow the vendors would hear from me. Tonight the house would rest, and so would I. The camera had remembered. The paper had waited. Now it was my turn. Morning arrived with the clean edge of a decision. I brewed coffee I could finally taste and opened the laptop to do the work I am built for: quiet, thorough, and impossible to argue with. First, security. I enabled 2-factor authentication on every company account that carried a balance or authority. Email, cloud storage, and the accounting system each received a new primary device key and a backup code sealed in a labeled envelope that I placed in the safe. I rotated passwords with a generator and replaced anything sentimental with strings that meant nothing at all, because meaning invites guessing. I reviewed app integrations inside the bookkeeping software and revoked a handful of stale tokens that had been issued in seasons when trust outran caution. Then I moved to the domain settings and changed the mail exchange records so that all company mail routed through a provider with better logs and better spam controls, the kind that show who tried to enter when and from where. None of that work made a sound. It did not need to. Locks do their job best when they are quiet. Next, authority. I opened the bank's business portal and confirmed the signatories. The list had my name at the top and an old entry for my father with limited permissions that I had left out of politeness, the way you leave a chair for someone who never sits in it. I removed that entry and saved the change with a note to self, "We are done confusing courtesy with risk." I created 2 new virtual cards tied to specific budgets that I alone control, one for materials ordered by purchase order and one for payroll taxes that should never share air with anything discretionary. I froze the card historically used for miscellaneous because, in my experience, miscellaneous means emergencies that are only emergencies because someone knew I would pad the fall. The system sent me a crisp confirmation email. Paper remembers. I drafted the vendor memo with language that would make an auditor nod. Effective immediately, it read, "Hale Home and Remodel will only accept invoices that reference a written purchase order signed by Marcus Hale. Shipments require a matching purchase order and receiving log. For your protection, please disregard any verbal authorizations or texts and route all questions to this address." I included a single-page attachment that listed my contact information and the company's tax identification number so that every supplier could update their records without digging. The memo carried no heat, no blame, no family. It sounded like what it was a standard. I sent it to our regulars in Kent and Tacoma, to the electrical supplier, who always answered the phone on the second ring, to the lumberyard that once let my father run a small balance on the promise that I would make it right. Within minutes, receipts hit my inbox like little flags. Received, understood. Thank you for the clarity. Standards are hospitality for people who have been burned by chaos. Then came the boundary letters I had drafted the night before. I read them once more out loud to hear any edges that might cut the wrong person. The letter to my parents stated that I would handle my mother's medicine directly with the pharmacy and send the pharmacy a card kept on file in my name, and that I would no longer contribute to my father's mortgage vehicles or leisure. The letter to my siblings explained that I would not fund trips or discretionary spending that did not involve me and did not serve the business, and that any expense submitted to the company for reimbursement without a signed purchase order would be denied as a matter of policy. I left out history and hurt. I left in dates and procedures. I printed the letters, signed them with a pen my grandmother once gave me, scanned them and emailed the scans so that the audit trail began at the same time the grace did. Only then did I address the weekend humming toward us. I opened the rental platform page using the link from an old family thread, the one we had used for years, to return to Leavenworth like birds to a feeder. The booking sat there with the cheery certainty of tradition, deposits paid on a sibling's card, the balance scheduled to be covered on arrival. In the message history, I recognized my father's tone, misusing my role. My operations guy will square the rest. He meant me. He had meant me for years. I wrote to the host in my own voice, careful and kind. "Hello, this note is to confirm that the company Hale Home and Remodel does not authorize personal travel expenses. If any party attempts to present the company or its funds for this reservation, please consider this message. Notice that such use is unauthorized. Should you need to cancel for non-payment, we understand." I did not ask the host to pick sides. I handed them a fact and the freedom to act within their policy. People can argue with feelings. Hosts cannot argue with terms of service. With that done, I returned to the accounting software and paused accounts payable for a single business day while I reviewed open invoices, not as punishment, but as inventory. Every paused line received a little note in the memo field, releasing upon purchase order, verification. I sent my foreman a short message, "No change to job schedules. New rule, no materials without a purchase order. Call me if anyone pressures you otherwise." Both men answered with simple acknowledgments and a relief that said they had been waiting for someone to say it plainly. The phone vibrated across the table with a text from Aaron, fizzing over with emojis I could not see without opening the thread. I let it rest face down. Silence was not a tactic, it was a boundary. My mother called twice, then left a voicemail that began with honey and blended into "we did not know," and "your father is under stress, and it would mean the world if you could just cover this weekend." I closed my eyes and listened to the words that were not spoken. "We expect you to make the cause and the effect stop speaking to each other. I am retired from that job. I am hiring gravity to do it for me." By late afternoon, I had done enough. The locks were changed without drama. The roads for money had signs where there used to be shortcuts. The cabin trip stood at the edge of its own choices, and I would not build a bridge for it. I shut the laptop and sat with the quiet to see if regret would arrive dressed as duty. It did not. What came was steadiness, the feeling of a floor you rebuilt yourself. Tomorrow would bring replies, then anger, then the sudden education that happens when a card declines and the host asks for another form of payment. Tomorrow would bring missed calls. Tonight, I cooked a portion of the casserole, ate at the counter, and washed the dish with the same care I had just given our books. This is what quiet revenge looks like up close. Not flames, not triumph, just a system realigned with truth. The next part is the sound of plans collapsing without an argument to hold them up. 48 hours before check in the cabin reservation blinked from cheerful to questionable. The host replied to my message with the kind of politeness that means a policy is about to speak. "Thank you, Marcus. We appreciate clarity. If the remaining balance is not covered by close of business today, our system will automatically cancel." That sentence was a door swinging on the hinges of the terms everyone had already agreed to. I did not add weight. I let the door move. By late afternoon, a second message arrived. "Payment failed. We will release the dates. No thunder, no smoke, just gravity finding the floor." I sat still long enough to feel the old urge to fix everything try to climb back into my hands. I did not let it. My phone lit up as if it were a small town at night, and every porch light came on at once. Missed calls stacked until the screen looked like a list of years. First Chloe, then Trevor, then Aaron, then my mother, then my father, then unknown numbers that smelled like borrowed phones. The group thread blinked with confetti turned to static. "What happened to the payment? You know the host. Fix it. Just this once. Do not be dramatic." Then my father's text arrived with the tone he reserves for when he wants to pretend he is calm. "Call me. It is urgent. We cannot fix this without you." I read each word like a label on a bottle I had decided not to drink. Urgent to him was a weekend. Urgent to me had been the sound of an ambulance carving December air while my family took selfies at a gas pump. I answered none of it. Instead, I replied to one message that deserved an answer, the host's. "Thank you for following your policy," I wrote. "We appreciate your professionalism." I meant it. People like to act as if standards are cruel. Standards are how you keep from having the same fight forever. A minute later, my email chimed with 2 vendor responses to the authorization memo I had sent that morning. The lumberyard wrote, "Understood, Marcus." Only signed purchase orders moving forward. The electrical supplier replied, "We have updated our file. Thank you for the protection." Those lines felt like oxygen after a long underwater swim. The business had the clarity it deserved. The family would now meet clarity's twin consequence. Aaron switched from jest to threat in the space of 3 messages. "You are ruining everything. You owe us after the year we have had. Fine, then pay me back for the loan with interest." I typed a sentence I had waited years to write and never thought I would send so calmly. "I am no longer funding leisure or personal spending." If you have a business expense with a signed purchase order, submit it through the system. She called me names that would sound like steam on camera. I put the phone face down. Silence is not a weapon when you have stopped fighting. It is a chair you offer your own restraint. By early evening, my father left a voicemail that began as performative leadership and collapsed into scolding. "Family sticks together, Marcus. You do not pull the rug out. You are the operations guy. You keep things moving." There it was, the mistake that had kept the gears hot for years. I was never the operations guy. I was the owner. I had just stopped pretending otherwise. I let the voicemail finish its loops without interrupting, then saved it. Not for court. For memory. I am not here to win an argument. I am here to stop losing the same one. What they did not know was that the first outside ripple had already reached a shore they cared about. A supplier in Kent forwarded a message my father had sent that afternoon asking for a rush on materials with a promise that Marcus will clear it Monday. The supplier added a single line to me, "We only deal with you." It was not meant as a compliment or an insult. It was a standard. I thanked them and confirmed that no rush would be authorized without a purchase order. Then I sent my foreman a check-in message, "You are covered. Do the work on schedule. If anyone tries to push materials without paperwork, tell them I said no." Both replied with the same word. Copy. A whole year of arguments can collapse into one word when authority finally matches responsibility. Night hazed the windows before the last piece of the day slid into place. The rental platform sent a formal cancellation notice time-stamped at 6:09. I could picture the moment the group realized they had to cover costs themselves or surrender the weekend. I could almost hear the argument about whose card could take the hit, whose credit limit had room after a season of treats, labeled as necessities. That is not cruel gloating. That is the map of how we got here drawn in spending that always assumed my wind would blow on cue. When the calls came back twice as fast and twice as hot, I let them all go to voicemail. I reheated a square of my mother's casserole, ate it standing at the counter, and washed the dish by hand. The apartment was not empty. It was quiet, which is what honesty sounds like when it is new. Before bed, I drafted one more small note I would send in the morning. To the family, I am unavailable this weekend. All business matters should be routed by email with purchase orders attached. Personal requests will not be answered. I read it aloud. It did not sound spiteful. It sounded like a boundary that had always been true and was only now being honored. Then I set my phone to Do Not Disturb and slept with both hands open the way you sleep when you have finally put down what you were never meant to carry. The next scene is wider than our front doors. It lives on a neighborhood street under a streetlight where a company van learned what rules look like when they are not built by me to save everyone else. Morning placed a pale coin of sun on the edge of the blinds, and with it came the consequence I had predicted without knowing the hour. The company van, a faithful block of metal and noise, sat overnight in my parents' subdivision because someone thought proximity to a problem was the same as solving it. Before breakfast, my mother forwarded a scanned letter from the Homeowners Association printed on cream paper that tries to make rules feel kind. Notice of violation, it read, "Commercial vehicle parked overnight in residential driveway. A fine would follow if it happened again." I read it twice, not in anger, but with the dry satisfaction of a person who has watched, 'cause finally shake hands with effect. The association did not care about our family myth. It cared about its bylaws. Paper remembers even when families prefer not to. My father took his frustration public. He posted a vague status about being blindsided by disloyalty and attached a sepia-toned photo of the van like a missing pet poster. The comments came fast, a quilt of sympathy from people who love conflict as long as it is tidy. "Hate that for you. Family first always. You got this, sir?" Then a contractor we both know from a job in Tacoma added a sentence that dropped like a level on a bowed board. "Marcus runs that shop." No argument followed. The thread lost air like a punctured tire. I did not click like. I did not comment. Quiet revenge is not a subtweet. It is a refusal to audition for roles you have already resigned. I sent a short message to my father that morning, professional and spare. "Please remove the company vehicle from the driveway. All fleet assets are to be parked at permitted locations or active job sites. Any fines incurred due to violations will not be reimbursed." He replied with a paragraph that called me cold and ungrateful and a few names that used to make me raise my voice. I typed one sentence back, "Follow the policy." Then I sent a separate email to our insurance agent confirming the parking requirements already on file. My goal was not to embarrass him. My goal was to make it impossible for poor choices to masquerade as emergencies I had to solve. Next came the small human pieces of the larger machine. I finalized the sunsets for the shared plans I had been paying. The family cell plan would transfer or end in 30 days. The streaming subscriptions would stop in 2 weeks. Aaron's loan top-ups would end on the 1st of the next month. Chloe's car lease autopay was already canceled, which meant the next due date would test whether she had listened when I explained how to set up her own payment. Each of these changes received its own polite message, written like a good sign on a bad curve, clear early, and not negotiable. "This is very important," I said more than once, "because you deserve information in time to act." It was not a script. It was respect that did not include rescue. Before lunch, a supplier in Kent called to confirm a change I had made. He prefaced the question with a compliment I did not need. "You always keep things neat, Marcus. Do you really want us to reject anything that is not signed by you?" I told him yes, even if a familiar voice pushed for an exception. "Especially then," I said. He laughed softly, a not unkind sound that held relief inside it. "On their end, standards make people feel safe. On my end, they keep me from becoming a myth again." After the call, I wrote a line in my notebook that I wish I had written years earlier: "Love without a boundary is a leak." The next message came from my mother, and it hit with the weight of routine dressed as crisis. "Honey, your sister's car payment is due tomorrow and there is an issue with her card. Can you float it and she will pay you back next week?" There was no malice in it. There was, however, a pattern as old as the neighborhood maple trees. I replied with kindness that sounded like steel. "I am unable to pay that for her. I can help her call the lender and set up her own autopay." The typing bubbles appeared, vanished, reappeared, vanished. Then, "She is embarrassed." I wrote, "Embarrassment is a good teacher." "I know." On the counter, the casserole containers glowed with the frost of last night's decision. Waste nothing. That includes the chance to let natural consequences do the teaching I can no longer afford to subsidize. By afternoon, the van had moved. The Homeowners Association wrote a second message that used the word "resolved," a word that always makes my shoulders lower. My father stopped posting for a few hours. Erin went quiet except for a single echo of the old rhythm. "So about the cabin." I did not answer. She needed more than a sentence. She needed time with the mirror. Trevor sent 3 texts that sounded like the frantic shuffle of someone counting what is left on a card. "I will cover it." "Wait, I cannot. Can you spot me until Friday?" The truth is painful and also simple. Friday has already come and gone too many times with me holding the difference. Toward evening, a more tender message arrived, the kind that can make a man second-guess good boundaries if he does not hold them with both hands. My grandmother wrote, "Darling, did you get my card?" I called her because some voices deserve air. "I did," I said. "It is with the papers I told you about." She exhaled the sound a small lake makes when wind stops. "Use it for the opposite of what they expect," she said again, and then added a sentence that rinsed the day clean. "You are not abandoning them. You are refusing to abandon yourself." We did not speak long. Some calls are a hand on your shoulder and do not need anything else. Night fell like a closing file. I reviewed the open invoices, balanced the week, and set the out of office for the weekend available for emergencies defined in the contract. All other matters Monday. Then I turned off the lights in each room and stood at the window where my city glittered like a scattered toolkit. The next act would belong to credit and to the quiet systemic lessons that show up as emails with subject lines no one likes to read. I would not celebrate those lessons. I would not soften them either. This is the part of the story where we learn that the world does not need me to play God for it to keep turning. Credit is the adult version of a report card with consequences that are slower but sharper. Chloe's arrived first. A late payment generated a notice the color of warning and a drop in her score of 48 points. She called crying in a way that felt like a memory. "I messed up," she said, "and now I cannot breathe." I spoke to her the way I wish someone had spoken to me when responsibility first started courting me too early. "Call the lender," I said. "Set up your own autopay. Ask for a one-time courtesy as a new payer and confirm the change in writing. You can fix this. I cannot fix it for you." She sobbed once, then twice, and then her breath evened into the rhythm of a person who has heard the road described and trusts her own feet. "Stay on the line while I call," she asked. "I will be here," I said, and I was. She did it. That was the whole magic trick. No cape. Just an adult learning to be one. Erin's update came as silence, then a burst. She emailed a copy of a leave of absence form from her program with a subject line that tried to make me the villain. "Hope you are happy." I did not reply to the performative part. I wrote 3 sentences to the human inside it. I am not happy. I am also not your lender. I believe you can finish later. If you want a budget template, I will send it. No response. Sometimes the most generous thing you can give someone is an offer without a hook. Trevor's path bent toward the clock. He took a night shift at a fulfillment center in Kent, a building that hums under the weight of packages the way a beehive hums under the weight of itself. He texted me on his first break, a hollow sound in his words I recognized from my own years of overtime. "This is brutal," he wrote. "Yes," I replied. "Brutal is another word for real." He sent a photo of his time clock punch like a middle schooler showing a report card. I told him I was proud in the plain way that does not need exclamation points to count. At the shop, the air changed without fanfare. I moved 2 foremen to full-time payroll with proper withholding and workers' compensation so they could stop straddling the gray space contractors use when the work is constant, but the paperwork is temporary. The men thanked me like I had given them a holiday off. "We just want to know what to expect," one said. And when the other added, "Expectation and time. The twins that raise a company out of adolescence." We tightened our purchase order process, which sounds boring, until you realize it is the difference between trust and guessing. Jobs ran on schedule. Deliveries matched invoices. The shop got smaller, cleaner, healthier. I slept with my jaw unclenched for the first time in a season. My father did not learn from the first quiet no. He pivoted as men do when habit meets a locked door and tried to open a window. He called the electrical supplier and attempted to place an order under the company name with the suggestion that Marcus will sign later. The supplier blessed the dignity that comes from being burned and deciding not to be again forwarded the request to me. Confirm, he asked. Declined, I wrote. Then, because I like things to be teachable, even when they are tense, I added, "No purchase order, no shipment. Thank you for checking." He answered with one word, "Copy." There is a particular kindness in a standard confirmed by someone who wants your company to survive. The rumor mill did what rumor mills do when they are underfed. It spun, then slowed, then squeaked. My father threatened to ruin my name in the trade, a sentence he spoke with confidence because it had worked before on men who feared scarcity more than they loved clean books. I did not answer his threat with a counter-threat. I answered it with a lunch and a slide deck. The Builders Association had invited me to present on practical risk controls for small contractors. I went, wore a plain shirt, and told the room what had saved us 2-factor authentication, like a seatbelt you do not perform for passengers, purchase orders that match receipts, logins that belong to one person at a time, a separation of family and payroll that does not budge. I did not say my father's name. I did not hint at our drama. I talked about policy as if it were a kind of love. The room nodded in the slow way people nod when the medicine tastes like water because they are thirsty. Erin scrubbed her social media of the gas station story from December 19th, and most of the posts that made entitlement look like a personality. Chloe sold her car to a national buyer that pays fast and moved back in with my parents to save on rent, a line that would have felt like failure to her last autumn, but now sounded like a plan with dates. Trevor stopped texting for loans and started texting me photos of sunrise from the warehouse parking lot. Change looks like that up close. Not triumph, not music swelling, just work done differently and then done again. In the middle of these shifts, my grandmother called with the voice of someone who writes short, true sentences. "I am proud of you," she said, "for what I asked," and she chuckled like a secret. "For not being loud," she said, "loud is easier. Quiet lasts." I wrote those words on a sticky note and stuck it to the inside of my safe. Beside it sat her uncashed check, a small rectangle of permission I had not needed but had felt good to hold. There are 2 kinds of proof in this life, the kind stamped by a state and the kind written by a woman who has lived long enough to know which kind actually changes a house. The next chapter required a table, 2 chairs, and a sky so blue it felt like an insult. That is how you know you have reached the part where people ask for a meeting in public. The weather gives you no place to hide. We met at a park where the city pretends to be a lake. The bench faced water so still it looked like a held breath. My father arrived late by 3 minutes, which is how he has always announced that time belongs to him. He opened with a sigh, so theatrical a passing jogger looked over. "Family sticks together," he said. The line had the weight of a scripture whose author was not God. "You do not do this to your own?" he continued, sitting like a man settling into a throne that had been reclaimed by the forest. I listened the way you listen to weather attentive, unoffended, aware that the sky will do what it wants. I brought something I said and slid an envelope across the bench's rough wood. Inside were copies of the articles of organization stamped by the state in the winter of 2016, the operating agreement naming a single member my name, and a one-page summary of our updated vendor policy. On top, I placed a transcript with 2 lines, highlighted "No family present" from the hospital chart and road trip with the real crew time stamped 9:42 geotag North Bend from the screen recording Jason had sent me. He flipped through the pages without reading, then tried a different key. "I was going to fix it," he said. "You know how your mother gets. You know how your sister is. You know how things are." That phrase is the lullaby of people who like their stories soft around the edges. "The company is a limited liability company owned by me," I said. "I am responsible for the books and the risk. I will not pay for personal spending or vacations. I will not mix your emergencies with payroll. If you want me to run the business, I will run it. If you want to start your own, I will wish you well." My voice surprised me with its absence of tremor. Quiet is not the lack of feeling, it is the presence of a foundation. He laughed, a brittle sound that used to make me hurry to soften it. "You think you can run this without me?" he said. "You are a book boy, Marcus. You are not the face." Book boy. The words might have stung if they did not contain their own confession. The only people who disparage books are those who have been saved by them without noticing. "I am not a face," I said. "I am a standard." He leaned back, tried to take up more space, and found the bench did not have more to give. "You will regret this," he said when the phones stopped ringing. I smiled in a way that startled even me because it was not cruel. "They already stopped ringing for you," I said, "and the work still gets done." There are moments in a confrontation where you can choose to escalate for sport. The impulse is a live wire. I let it burn down without touching it. "We are done mixing family and business," I said. "If you want to see me, call me on Sunday afternoons. If you want to discuss the company, email me. I will reply in writing." He tried again, aiming for the soft target where guilt used to live. "After all I have done for you," he said. "After the roof over your head, the food, the childhood." He did not say the part where childhood came with a ledger and love arrived itemized. I did not need him to. "Thank you," I said. "And no." 2 short sentences, doors that close without slamming. We sat for a few breaths and watched a dog chase the same stick as if repeating a pattern could make it a plan. He pocketed the envelope without saying he would read it. He stood without saying goodbye. He walked away without looking back. None of those choices were new. I had only just stopped pretending they were temporary. When he was far enough that I could not see the slope of his shoulders, I let out a breath I did not know I had been holding since I was a child, calculating how to keep a dinner from going sideways. On the walk to my car, my phone buzzed with a message from Jason. He had not known about the meeting. He was not a puppet for a moral. "You good?" He wrote 2 words that fit in your pocket. "I am," I replied, and realized I meant it in the unflashy way that lets you eat dinner without rehearsing the next dozen sentences you might need to defend yourself. That night, I reviewed one more time the systems I had put in place, not because I mistrusted them, but because habits do not disappear. They are replaced. 2-factor authentication still held. Vendor policies were confirmed. The bank accounts were clean. The foremen had their new status letters, and their wives had, according to one cheerful text, cried happy when they saw the withholding forms because stability looks like a new kind of holiday. I slept without the dream where I am sprinting while carrying a house. The next day would be anticlimax to anyone who has been raised on scenes. To me, it was the proof that quiet revenge is not revenge at all. It is stewardship. It is phones not ringing for the wrong person and the right work being done by the right hands on the right timeline. It is a name spoken without fear in rooms where invoices and receipts sit together without arguing. And then, because stories need different light. Sometimes I drove to a coast where the air salts what it touches and learned what peace tastes like, when it has not been flavored by obligation. In the weeks that followed, the noise thinned. My father attempted a few late comebacks in circles where bluster used to be a currency. He phoned a vendor and suggested that if they wanted his future business, they would have to forget the paperwork theater. They forwarded the message to me with the curt professionalism of people who have learned to protect their profit margins. Confirm policy, they asked. Confirm, I replied, attaching our single-page standards again, not because they had forgotten, but because repetition is a kindness in a system that used to survive on improvisation. The vendor answered with a line that felt like a benediction from a different kind of church. We prefer companies that do what they say. The Builders Association lunch arrived on a wet Tuesday that made the city smell like metal and rain. I spoke for 20 minutes and used no slides with explosions. I showed screenshots of two-factor authentication prompts, examples of purchase orders matching receiving logs, a template for boundary letters that kept emotion out and dates in, and a checklist for separating family from payroll, like you separate wires so you do not burn the house down while plugging in a lamp. I did not say who had taught me the hard way to make that list. I did not need to. In the questions, an older contractor with hands like work asked, "How do you keep your people from taking it personal?" I answered the way the answer had arrived to me, by doing it every time, not just when I am angry. He nodded. A few heads bent over phones, not to scroll away, but to save the template I had offered quietly free. Rumors persisted in smaller rooms where people mistake heat for light. He stole the company, someone said to someone else within earshot of a foreman who likes facts. The foreman replied with a sentence so plain it should be engraved on the entrance of small business life. He is the company. Harsh. Maybe if you prefer a story where the face is the boss. Accurate. Completely. The men doing the work followed the rules because the rules paid them on time. Anyone who disliked it could dislike it while cashing a cleaner check. Erin trimmed her online life down to something that looked almost human. Photos of things she eats and places that do not require tips, captions without the old sheen of deserve. Chloe started keeping a notebook of bills with due dates, and once in a moment that told me a new branch had grown, asked me to proof her budget without asking for money to fill it. Trevor got promoted to team lead on nights, which sounds like a small raise because it is, but the way he held his shoulders in a photo he sent me said it was also a reintroduction to himself. We are all being reintroduced to ourselves, I thought, and some days it is a pleasure. My mother oscillated between scripts. On Tuesdays, she sent recipes. On Fridays, she sent reminders that family is all we have. A sentence that is true in the same way a mirror is true, it reflects what you put in front of it. I answered the recipes with thanks and tried the one with lemon and herbs because it tasted like evenings I am willing to remember. I did not answer the reminders. The camera had already recorded the day the reminder would have changed something and did not. My father made one last attempt to turn the ship he had steered by volume. He left a message that promised to make some calls and tell people who you really are. I played it once standing in the quiet of my kitchen and then saved it under a file name that told the truth noise late winter. That same week, 3 jobs closed cleanly, 2 new bids were accepted, and a supplier offered a small discount for documented receiving that reduced returns to almost none. Reputation in business is less about what people say in rooms you will never enter and more about how quickly your emails get answered by the people who keep your calendar full. Some nights I sat in my apartment and waited for grief to knock for the kind that follows loss, even when the loss is a choice. It came, but not with horns. It came like a slow-moving tide. I thought about being little about lemonade jars and lists about learning that being useful was how to be loved. I let the tide wash the kitchen and did not mop it away. I told the boy who kept the jar that he had done well and told the man who keeps the books that he was allowed to take a day off without the sky falling. He believed me. That is how I knew something had changed in a way that would last. When the phone did ring, it usually belonged to the workday. Vetted vendors, schedules checked. A foreman sending a photo of a perfect line of tile with a caption that read, "Satisfying." The shop sounded like competence. The family sounded like people learning loudly sometimes what it costs to be a person who pays for their own choices. I did not cheer when they stumbled. I did not wrap them in bubble wrap either. I placed a chair by the door and sat in it with my hands on my knees, listening to a house that no longer creaked the way it used to. The story did not end there because stories rarely end on Tuesdays after lunch. It turned its face toward the ocean. I booked a small place south where the coast pulls you into a conversation you cannot dominate and packed a single bag with clothes that forgive you for not pretending. The last thing I put in the safe before I left was my grandmother's check still uncashed tucked beside the papers that made my life heavier and lighter at the same time. The door closed with the soft click of a lock doing its job. The sky blue and unblinking watched me choose a different kind of quiet. Cannon Beach in late winter is a study in restraint. The sky does not perform. The sea does not brag. You stand there with the salt in your lungs and realize you have been holding your breath for years without knowing it. I rented a small cabin through an app I had never shared with anyone in my family, the kind with a wood stove that makes its own conversation, and arrived at dusk. I turned on a lamp that glowed the color of honey, placed my phone face down, and listened to a silence that was not empty, only generous. On the first morning, I walked until my calves protested the wet sand writing and erasing my footprints like a secretary with a sense of humor. I thought about all the ways love gets mispronounced as obligation, and all the ways boundaries get mislabeled as cruelty by people who want your agency but not your needs. A gull laughed at something only gulls understand. I laughed back, which felt like a new muscle moving the way it is supposed to. When I got back to the cabin, there were messages, of course. Some were angry, fueled by the sugar rush of entitlement crashing. Some were soft, trying out the grammar of accountability. One was from my grandmother, a single line, "Breathe." I did. For once, breathing did not feel like an assignment. In the afternoons, I cooked simple food and read books that have nothing to do with business or self-help, because it turns out my brain likes a room without a chore list. At night, I opened the safe I had brought with me, the travel one that is mostly symbolic, because what I was protecting could not be stolen by hands, only by decisions. Inside were 2 anchors, the legal documents that named me owner of a small company that had tried to pretend it was a family heirloom, and a check from a woman whose handwriting had steadied my childhood when the grown-ups could not. I held the papers the way you hold a tool you have finally learned to use without hurting yourself. On the 3rd day, I turned my phone back on properly and read a message from my father that surprised me. Not because it apologized, it did not, but because it used fewer words than usual. "I heard you spoke at the association," he wrote. "They said it was good." I considered replying with the sentence I had practiced for years, something about being open to trying again when he was ready to treat me like a son and not a solution. Instead, I wrote 2 words that tasted like a calibrated truce. "Thank you." Then I put the phone back down. Some conversations are not ready to be had. Some will never be ready, and that is its own kind of peace. If you are watching this and thinking about the moment you keep fixing the person, you keep carrying the card, you keep handing over because it is easier than hearing the story about why they cannot, I am going to say a sentence that I wish someone had said to me earlier and that you will not want to hear until you are ready. It is not love if it requires you to disappear. When I stopped disappearing, a dozen small disasters my family had avoided for years finally arrived at their own doors. The world did not end. It got honest. On my last night at the coast, the sky cleared with the kind of blue that makes painters either cry or quit. I stood in it and said the names of the people I had been for other people, the operations guy, the fixer, the oldest child who ensures the check clears the book boy who becomes a lightning rod. Then I said my own name the way you say a promise to a room that is listening. "I am Marcus," I said, "and I do not pay for peace with my disappearance." The waves did not clap. They did not need to. I drove back to Seattle the next morning with the kind of quiet that does not feel like an empty house, but like a house with doors that fit their frames. At home, I placed my grandmother's check back in the safe beside the folder that began this portion of the story. I left them there unspent and unshouted. The phone blinked with new messages. I answered the ones that were about work. I answered my grandmother. I let the rest float until they sank. Family is a group project where one person sometimes does all the work until that person remembers they can put down the binder and walk outside. December 19th, 2021, 9:15 at night began my remembering. 4 days later, a request for $3,100 completed the lesson. The months after that wrote the homework in a language everyone can learn if they want standards, boundaries, and the kind of love that does not ask a person to go missing. If any of this sounds like yours, tell me your city in the comments and the day you chose to stop being the wind. Subscribe to hear the parts I did not tell yet, because what they never expect is how quiet the turn can be when the truth finally does its job.